Welcome into the Skinny Podcast. It's the weekly potpourri edition. I'm Richard Skinner, local12.com digital sports columnist and editor with Rick Broering. As always, it's presented by Blake, the attorney Mason. We got some NFL and Bengals to talk about, some college basketball to talk about, some college football to talk about. We've got a gambling segment, and then my favorite segment of the podcast where you can hit up the X-verse, hit up the hashtag AskSkinnyAnything, where you ask me questions. I answer them. They do not have to be sports related. In fact, we prefer if they're not, but if they are, we'll answer them as well. And Rick, this time of year, we always got a lot going on.
Yeah, usually this time of year, Skinny, the last few years at least, it's been an exciting time because you get the Bengals coming down the stretch. They're fighting for the playoffs, usually doing well around this time. And it's combining with, on the weekends, you've got college basketball ramping up, and it becomes a great time of year for sports fans in this area. Well, this year, you're just going to have to turn the page because the Bengals dropped another one. They fall to 4-7 after their most recent debacle on Sunday night against the Chargers in a 34-27 loss. You and Mike Petraglia did the post-game podcast where you talked about all the plays and takeaways from that. So we'll go a little bit more big picture, some of the fallout since that game on this podcast. And we'll start with, what did you think of Ja'Marr Chase's comments after the loss, specifically the ones that seemed to be directed at Zac Taylor?
Yeah, I do think this. I think emotions certainly run high when you're struggling like this and you think you're a good football team and you believe you're better than your record. And Ja'Marr is an emotional guy. Most diva wide receivers are. That being said, I thought Zach kind of clapped back at him a little bit yesterday where he said, and I'm paraphrasing, that we put him in position to lead the league in just about every category. So if Jamar's clamoring for the ball more, I think they've given him plenty of opportunities. The stats don't lie in that regard. And let's not forget, he and Joe Burrow were just a tick off on a deep touchdown pass at a key time in the game. I don't think that's anybody's fault. They called a play. Jamar ran the play. Joe threw the ball. They were just a tick off. So I don't know if that's Zach's fault, to be honest with you. But again, I think emotions run high. It's worth, obviously, for us in the media to print those things because it does generate conversation. It is factual. He said what he said. No, he was not misquoted by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, I sometimes roll my eyes at that of okay, that's just a player being a player after a game, after a raw loss. I fully understand it.
Normally, I would feel much more that way. That's like, why are you even making a big deal out of this? Is a pretty nothing comment. It's, like you said, guy is fired up after a loss. He's just shooting from the hip a little bit. But as soon as I heard these comments, I immediately flashed back to that day in training camp where Zac Taylor had told all you guys the day before, yep, Jamar's going to be practicing tomorrow. He's back. He's good to go. He's with us again. And then he shows up midway through practice, strolling in street clothes and not practicing, making a big scene, essentially throwing Zach under the bus, making him look foolish in front of all the media types that had been asking about it every single day. It was the biggest storyline of training camp. It felt like a direct slap in the face, F you to the head coach. Now looking back at that, hearing these comments now, you have to wonder if there's just an overall lack of respect for Zac Taylor from Ja'Marr Chase.
Yeah, I think probably more Jamar towards the entire organization, but maybe there is. I don't sense that. I really don't. Again, Jamar likes to talk, and that's okay. I think he was kind of flying from the hip a little bit. And maybe it's not. Maybe there's a terrible relationship there. If there is, we're going to find that out here in the next few weeks. One more loss. If you come out of the bye, lose to Pittsburgh, I think then you're going to have a lot of finger pointing going. I mean, you're on that cusp right now of that, right? You lose this next game to Pittsburgh out of the bye where, there's still a belief that you can make a run because the schedule is what the schedule is down the stretch, and you've played good teams close and you just can't find a way to win. And, maybe that evens itself out. But yeah, I will say I think they are one more close loss away from either fingers being pointed in every direction and then guys making business decisions after that.
Just to be clear, are you saying there's a belief in that locker room, or do you agree with that? Do you think there's actually a chance this team is still alive?
I do. I think the team is very alive. I mean, you beat Pittsburgh, you're going to be honestly, I think they're going to be favored in the Pittsburgh game because it's a home game, to be honest with you. You're going to be favored in the next probably 5 games.
Wow. I was not expecting that. I thought this was going to be the post-mortem report on the season. So you're still saying there's a chance. I just can't. I guess the thought is how could anyone believe that this team will pull together that many wins in a row?
It's a fair point. Listen, I get anybody who believes that. I don't discount that portion of it. Again, they could come out of this bye week and get smacked by Pittsburgh. If they do, then okay, then we've got some real issues that are going to run deeper than just finishing out this season. I think we talked about this last week. I think there are issues beyond this season that are going to probably prevent this team from making the playoffs in the next few years. I do still think this season itself on the level is still salvageable.
I felt that way up until this game. This one, I'd say the hope is gone, at least from my viewpoint. CBS had a column out that was NFL coaching hot seat rankings.
Yeah, I saw it. That guy's a clown.
Doug Peterson from the Jags is number 1. Matt Eberflus from the Bears is number 2. Mike McCarthy from the Cowboys, number 3. Zac Taylor from the Bengals is number 4, Skinny. His comment was, Taylor will likely get another opportunity to coach in the league, but his run in Cincinnati appears to be over. How accurate do you think that is?
I don't. I just don't. I think, listen, if this season goes sideways or, they don't make the playoffs or whatever, I do think there's going to be moves made. I can see Lou Anarumo being shown the door. I can see a couple position coaches being shown the door. It's not Mike Brown's nature. I mean, listen, the leash for Marvin Lewis was how long, Rick? How long? I mean, listen, he should have been shown the door in 2000, whatever that was, 11, right? And then they had the great reboot, and it proved to be right because they made the playoffs 5 years in a row. I mean, for a guy to take you to a Super Bowl and an AFC championship game in back-to-back years and then 2 years later be fired, I don't know if I'm buying that, man.
I'm with you, but it does seem like that sentiment is growing. Certainly from an outside perspective, certainly from the fan base's point of view.
Well, sure.
Around the league, it seems to be, from a national perspective, it seems to be growing too. The problem is, I don't think the Bengals front office has ever operated by public opinion or what the outsiders think.
Correct. And yeah, I do you not know, if you're not, I guess I'd ask this guy, do you not know how this organization works? I just don't see it. I mean, honestly, if Duke Tobin still has a job after this year, then Zac Taylor's going to have a job after this year.
I think most people would argue Duke Tobin probably should not have his job.
I agree with you.
Year, yeah.
He's the one who should probably go. He's the one who's constructed these awful rosters. So if anybody should go, he's the one that should go.
Yeah,
and
I agree with that.
And I don't think he's going.
Yeah, I mean, let's stay on this topic just for a second because it's what most people are talking about this week, given the nature of this season. How attractive of a job do you think this is if you were to move on from Zac Taylor? Do you think the Bengals would be able to attract top options? Because one of the things that I always caution people against is be careful what you wish for, man.
Right,
to your point,
right.
Zac Taylor did take you to an AFC championship. He did take you to a Super Bowl appearance. And maybe that was just Joe Burrow. Maybe it was just blind luck of things coming together at the right time for him. But we've already seen what this franchise can look like for decades at a time when you don't have the right people in place. So I would open it up to that. Where do you think they would go if they didn't have Zac Taylor? Could they actually get someone better than him?
I don't know. Because here's the thing. The attraction of Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase is something, right?
You would think.
But they've got a lot of holes to fill on the defense, on the offensive line. I'm telling you, man, the next few years, you better hope that the Miles Murphys and the Cam Taylor Britts and the Jordan Battles and the Cordell Volsons, and you better hope they get better. I mean, that's literally where we're at with this thing. You better hope that they get better, and then you better hope you hit on the next few drafts. I don't have high hope for that.
I still think the allure of coaching Joe Burrow in his prime, and if you still have Jamar Chase too, add him into that mix, is a lot for any head coach looking to get their career going. They would be excited about taking on that challenge. But Skinny, the bigger concern I have is how on earth did the Bengals just undo over a decade's worth, probably more than that, of building up goodwill and trying to rid their franchise's name of all the stink that came with it, of them being cheap, of them not operating like other NFL teams, of them not doing things the right way and always cutting corners. How did they undo all of that in a matter of 6 months here, dating back to training camp until now? We're already back in the point where across the league and nationally, people are making fun of the Bengals for being cheap, for not handling their players right, not taking care of them, not doing what they need to do in free agency. And now all of a sudden you're seeing these videos from podcasts with former players, TJ Hushmansada, Andrew Whitworth. Guys are talking about some of the instances that they ran into with the Bengals and with Mike Brown. And now all of a sudden that sentiment is back out there that the Bengals are cheap. They don't do things the right way. I'm just wondering, is that going to hurt them once again, where people aren't going to want to come here because they're like, you don't want to be in that organization?
Yeah, no, I fully understand that sentiment. It's almost like the 3 times they've gone to the Super Bowl, they went, we're good. 81 and 82 were great. They had a great team in 82. Unfortunately, the strike happened, and all of a sudden the roster went south for a handful of years. 88 was the Super Bowl team, and then they never quite matched that after that. And then within a handful of years later, became the disaster of the rest of the 90s, right? And I think that, it feels like they've just gotten lucky in a couple of windows, and otherwise it is business as usual. And I think that's the unfortunate part to this. And it is Mike Brown not being willing to make tough decisions like firing people. I mean, honestly, I honestly mean this. I don't like to see anybody get fired, but how does Duke Tobin have a job after this year? How does he still have a job?
No, I mean, and you could have made that argument probably prior to this year, but in a Bengals organization where they've had such little success, it was easy to say, well, look at what these guys just did a couple years ago. They've got the franchise in a good spot, comparatively speaking. But I mean, there's been signs for the last few years that things were not trending in the right direction, especially when it comes to putting this roster together and drafting. And now they're paying the price for that.
It kind of reminds me of the Reds paying for Joey Votto and then saying, hey, we're good. We're good. We got our guy. We got our one guy.
Yeah.
And that's what the national narrative right now is. Oh, the Bengals have 3 stars. One leads the league in sacks. One leads the league in passing. One leads the league. How are they 4-7? They're 4-7 because you don't play with 3 players.
Yeah, it's a total team game. And that's why we've been talking about all year when we've been talking about the receivers and do you pay Jamar and T. Higgins? And to your point, you've been on this since before the season started. It's not enough. You need an entire team. And if you're going to pay all that money to 2 receivers and then have nothing left over for defensive linemen that are going to put pressure on the quarterback, offensive linemen that are going to protect your quarterback, the secondary on the defensive side, all the holes that you have in this team, then it's not going to be enough. And I think we've seen that play out clear as day this season.
And that's where I'm all for paying those guys. But I'm all for paying those guys if you'd hit on your other draft picks, that you had guys on rookie contracts that are producing, and you just don't. And so you can't pay everybody, unfortunately, and you've got a lot of holes to fill. I mean, a lot of holes to fill.
Some of the names that have been thrown about as kind of like the top maybe coordinators that would be up for a head coaching job this year. Obviously, one guy who's sitting out and not coaching anyone, who's a former head coach with a lot of pedigree, Bill Belichick. You've got Ben Johnson, the Lions offensive coordinator. Joe Brady, the Bills offensive coordinator, is a guy that people bring up a lot because he was the offensive coordinator at LSU with Joe and Jamar. Do any of those names do anything for you? Or are there any other names out there?
Yeah, Ben Johnson, obviously, with what he's doing in Detroit is fun. I mean, they can throw it. They can throw it deep. They can throw it short. They can run it. They can run it with 2 different guys. I mean, they're putting 40 points on everybody and sometimes 50 points on teams. I mean, he turned down the carrot. He had a chance to be the Washington head coach and didn't take it. And Dan Quinn fell into a nice spot. I mean, I think he'd be fun and the offense would be fun. But I mean, this offense as it is still averaging 28 points a game. So I think he'd be fun from an offensive perspective. But the defense is a mess personnel wise. It is a mess personnel wise. You need to remake the safety room. You're hoping to God Dax Hill can come back and play corner on a surgically repaired knee. Guys have done it. It's not impossible, but that's one of your hopes. I don't know. Is Cam Taylor-Britt going to be able to bounce back from this ever, or is this what he's unfortunately going to be? And now you got, DJ Turner's going to come off of a broken collarbone. You can certainly play after that and play fine. I thought he had a really good game the other night. You're about to the point where you need to remake your linebacker spot. You haven't hit on any of your defensive line draft picks. And yes, the jury's still out on McKinley Jackson and Chris Jenkins. I fully understand that. But Miles Murphy hasn't done much so far, unfortunately, and I was kind of bullish on him going into the season. I know he started it hurt, but at some point, you've got to hit on some of these guys. And we're not talking, hey, listen, I don't need Andrei Yoshivach to be a guy, right? I mean, it's a 6th-round pick. If he hits, good. I need 1st and 2nd-round guys to play. I need Jackson Carman to be starting on this offensive line.
Yeah. Ben Johnson is one of those names that I brought up because everyone is on the same page as you. It's exciting. It'd be fun. Everyone wants him. But he's been selective
Yes.
with taking a head coaching job. And he's the type of guy that I wonder, would he be attracted to coming to Cincinnati and coaching the Bengals if you were to get rid of Zac Taylor? Because if you can get a guy like that, then the whole idea of let's move on from Zac Taylor becomes more interesting to me. I just don't know that the Bengals would be trying to attract that type of talent or that they'd be able to. And that's what concerns me, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fair point. Yeah, I'm back at the stage where I don't trust anything this organization does anymore. They bought my trust a little bit, but that trust is long gone again.
Yeah, I think that's fair. All right, just from taking it forward standpoint, what's next? What's the focus for this team as they head into this bye week and then get back to action?
Yeah, I mean, come back on Monday refreshed and ready to roll. I mean, you've got basically playoff games from here on out that you have to play. I mean, every game is literally matters now, and let's see how this team responds to it. The thing is, it doesn't feel like it's far away because of how well it's played against good teams. But again, you've lost. You're 1-6 now against teams above 500. I take back 0-6 against teams above 500. 1-5 in one possession games. At some point, that's what you are. It's not one game you lose close to a good team. Okay, that's maybe bad luck. But when it starts piling up time and time again, maybe you're just not good enough. Now that being said, I got to give the Steelers all the credit in the world, but I also don't think they're elite. I just don't. I think their defense is, but I think they're a beatable team. And then you've got sub 500 Dallas, which is a complete train wreck mess. Sub 500 Tennessee, which is a complete train wreck mess. Sub 500 Cleveland, which is not as big of a train wreck mess as it was, but still a big mess. And then you've got Denver coming here. And again, these are all winnable games, in my opinion. You could rattle off 5 wins. You're going to be favored, in my opinion, in the next 5 games. It's up to you to go get it done.
All right, let's switch gears to college basketball, and we'll start with the big game here locally of the week. Cincinnati pulled out a 76-60 win over NKU at Truist Arena on NKU's campus. This is an awesome college basketball event. It's awesome when high major teams play at mid-major teams' arenas, and they give them that shot. Kudos to UC for not buying out of this contract, because I thought for sure 2 years ago when NKU beat them at Truist Arena, there was no chance that Wes Miller, it was not a contract that he was a part of putting together. He didn't like that it was put together the way it was. Also, in that time, you've gone from the RPI system with team sheet selection at the end of the year when you're talking about the NCAA tournament to the net system, which has changed how that math works out in terms of playing a team like NKU. It used to be more beneficial under the RPI system. It's not whatsoever now under the net system to play a quality mid-major opponent. So this was a game that UC didn't want to play. Wes Miller for sure was expected to buy out of, and he showed up and he played it anyway. I don't know if his administration forced him to do it or not, but kudos to him, because I really never thought this game would be played, and NKU had their chance. They played well. They had it down to a 1-point game at different times in the second half, and they just couldn't get over the hump, and UC ended up pulling away.
Yeah, to your point, I agree with you, and maybe it is just being honorable. I mean, they bailed you out when they needed an arena, and part of that was the 4-year contract. You're right; they could have bought them out of that, but I think it's the honorable thing to do. And I wish there would be more of these. I wish Xavier and Dayton played. I wish Miami played. Some of these teams would play Miami. I wish Kentucky and Indiana would play. I think they're all great for the sport.
There were about 7,400 in attendance. That was what was reported for this game. Not quite a sellout at NKU, but as close as they'll get this year. And it was a fun event. Anyone who was there, and there were a lot of UC fans there. It was probably maybe 60-40 NKU versus UC. I mean, maybe even closer to 50-50, honestly. There were a lot of UC fans there for certain, and you heard them. But that made it fun. I mean, It was an awesome atmosphere. No matter what happened, big play for either team, fans were cheering. And I think any UC fan that made that trip over to NKU enjoyed that performance. I'm sure they didn't like the first half when their team was struggling and it was close, but it was a fun game. They ended up winning by 16 points, and they got a good test. They finally got to see their team in a real game that felt like they were being challenged. And then after the game, you hear Wes Miller talking, and he credits NKU and everything, but he's immediately talking about how no high major teams are going to play games like that. No high major teams should play games like that. How it's a really difficult thing to do, and you don't get enough credit for it, and it's just never going to happen again. And I agree with him. That is the case. But Skinny, how do we incentivize this? Like, what can we do to convince it or convince them or make high major teams realize that it is worth it to go schedule games like this at least once a year? I mean, do you have anything you could think of that would make that work?
The only thing I can think of is however you would rate that in the net system of giving it, I mean, extra credence, however you would do that. I don't know what that would be. Maybe you get a one-off. You play on a mid-major's home floor and you either get a bit of a boost, or maybe it just gets stricken entirely. I honestly don't know. But
a daily double game, right? Like, you get one daily double throughout the season, where if you play on the road against the team outside the top 150, you double their metrics or something.
I'm good. I mean, honestly, I'm good with that. I mean, that's the only thing you can do, right?
I've got an idea.
Okay.
What's the biggest thing in all of college athletics right now? What's the most important thing to all of these coaches? NIL money. Can you make it each team from a power conference can schedule a mid-major game at another thing and turn it into an NIL fundraiser? Because most of these games would be regional games, right? It's like Cincinnati at NKU or Kentucky at
Bellarmine.
Eastern Kentucky.
Bellarmine or Eastern,
Right, perfect. Louisville at Bellarmine, right? So there's a tie in there with the local community. You could put together fundraiser aspects and turn it into an NIL game.
I like it.
Certain games aren't going to be worth as much, obviously, and maybe that won't be enough to entice some of the high major teams. But I think if you're leaving money on the table in NIL, that looks bad as a head coach right now. I think it would entice some head coaches to potentially schedule those games. I'm not sure if it's enough there, but we probably have to workshop that more. But I feel like there needs to be some type of incentive to force these games to continue to happen, because it was awesome. It's good for the sport. It's good for fans on both sides of the aisle, I think. I just wish that was not the case, as Wes Miller laid it out. And he's correct. I mean, they're not going to happen anymore. That might be the last chance NKU will ever have to have a high major team in their building, but it was awesome. All right, Cincinnati takeaways. What did you think of the effort?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I think it's a work in progress without Dan Skillings, and I think they'll get better from that. But they miss him. I mean, let's face facts. They should miss him because he's a good player, right? But they do have other options, and I think they're showing that in the last couple of games. And would that be enough against a Kansas, a Baylor right now? Probably not. But I still think this is a really good team that's going to get through the non-con. You know, there's a legitimate chance that both UC and Xavier, when the shootout comes, are undefeated. There's a legit chance for that. And, you know, that would make that game obviously significant, but it would mean both teams are on track for having good non-conference records.
Yeah, they'd both be ranked at that point, too.
Yeah, right.
Xavier's right outside, and UC is already there. So that could be fun. Seamus Lukosius is on a ridiculous heater right now, Skinny. He changed that game in the second half. I mean, had he not gotten hot for UC and hit those 6 threes, might be a different story. It might have come down to the bitter end there. How about this? He goes 6 of 9 from the field, all of them from 3-point range, has 18 points. He dragged down his shooting percentage with that performance.
It's crazy.
He went from like 74% to just around 70% now. But man, he is really playing at an extremely efficient level that I don't know that we've seen for 4 or 5 games here like he's done it.
No, I thought early last year he reminded me of a guy you pick up in the YMCA to play. That's what he reminded me of. Hey, the guy can make some buckets on occasion, and boy, look at him go. That's great. But I think he's become a legit threat for them.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, he was their best player down the stretch last year.
Yeah.
And man, he's off to an incredible start this season. And when you get Dan Skillings back, it only makes them that much tougher to guard on offense. I think this team is scary when they play in transition. I don't think they've done that as well in past years, where they've pushed the ball and then been able to spray it around, like move the ball quickly around the perimeter for open 3-point looks. And part of it is they just might not have had the 3-point threats that they did. But now when you throw out a Connor Hickman along with a Seamus Lukosius, and in theory, then you could have like a Dan Skilling, CJ Frederick alongside of them too. Now you've got 3 or 4 options slinging the ball around the perimeter to go with those athletes that you're going to lob the ball to at the rim, like Dylan Mitchell and Assis Bandago. And it definitely makes them tougher to guard because you're having to guard more of the floor when you play them. I'd also say Assis Bandago, I think he looks better to me, but to your point, when we started this, you got to prove it against Big 12 competition first.
Right.
We'll see if he's able to have the same type of impact against those teams when they're a lot more physical.
But having Dylan Mitchell with him helps a ton. A ton. I mean, last year you had Lurch trying to help him, and he wasn't going to rebound anything. and he
Yeah.
always fouled, and he thought he was a stretch four.
Yeah, and these two guys, like maybe you'd think, oh, you'd like guys that complement each other a little bit better, that are more different, like have a skilled guy to go with them. But I almost think it's perfect for their style of defense, where they really want to take away your 3-point looks and they want to funnel everything into the rim where they have some shot blockers. Adding another guy who's really quick at that forward position with length and Dylan Mitchell makes their defense that much tougher to score on, in my opinion. And I don't know. I thought it was a good showing there late to pull away like they did, because you're on the road in a tough environment, and NKU had them on the ropes a little bit. NKU was playing well, making shots early, and UC was able to claw their way out of that.
Yeah, and I had a buddy that called me yesterday. I think the opening line was like -14, and he said they'll beat them by. I said, I don't know, man. That matchup zone seems to give Wes and them fits, and they're down Dan Skillings. And at the end of the day, I think both teams walk away with their heads held. I mean, you actually covered the spread if you're UC, believe it or not. I think it ended up closing at 14 or 15, so they did technically cover. And to your point, most fans probably are thinking, that should be a 20-plus point win because look what we did to Nichols, look what Nichols did to them. And I think sometimes you get caught up in those comparisons way, way too much. For goodness sakes, I mean, Nichols, when it played UC, was also playing on back-to-back nights, so there was that factor as well. And NKU stunk up the joint for a chunk of the Nichols game too, so that was a little bit on them as much as it was Nichols winning that game. It was more NKU losing that game. So yeah, no, I think both teams come away with that feeling better. I know it's hard for NKU to feel good right now at 0-4, and the Nichols loss sticks. But I mean, 3 or 4 losses, you were double-digit. Well, you weren't double-digit underdog to Florida State, but you were still almost a double-digit underdog. 3 high major teams, you can accept those. Nichols one's tough to swallow at the moment.
It is, and it was tough to swallow, especially at the time, because it was like through those first 2 games, you're thinking they're going to be okay. Right. It's no big deal to lose by 12 at Florida State and, by 22 at Purdue. But then all of a sudden you struggle the way you did against Nichols, and it's like, oh man, this team might really be in trouble. So to see them respond against the Cincinnati team that was playing well, and some of the big takeaways, I mean, Sam Vincent, 16 points in this one, carrying them on offense in the first half, exploding to the rim and finishing against those shot blockers. He went 7 of 17 from the field, missed some shots as the game went on, but 4 rebounds, 2 assists. This was the first game where he looked like he was back.
How much did you think he was rusty and maybe didn't trust the knee, or how much of it was just, for some of that competition level, whatever it was? Because I've always been a big believer in him as a player, and I do get the human nature is what it is, man. You're coming off major knee surgery. That always we do. I do it myself. We always take it for granted that Jimmy's got to have surgery on his shoulder. He's going to come back and be fine as a pitcher. Well, I mean, the human body just got cut on and had a bunch of stuff done to it, and you're expecting the guy to be the same guy. And sometimes it's a psyche thing of, to your point, can I really explode to the rim and not worry about coming down and landing on that thing? I get all of that. And maybe it is just him finally shaking off some rust.
I think it was a mental thing as much as anything. And before that, I was more worried after the Nichols game of like, oh no, does he just not have it? And can he maybe not handle the load of being a go-to scorer when Marquez Warwick isn't playing alongside of him? There were real concerns there coming out of the Nichols game. But in this one, he looked like a star once again. I mean, that the guy that we saw against Cincinnati will dominate the Horizon League and be a first-team all-league type of player. And that, I think the way he was getting by guys and exploding to the rim made me feel like it was more of a mental thing the first 2 games. He just didn't quite trust it, or didn't know if he could do it yet. And for whatever reason, it clicked in this UC game. I don't know if it was adrenaline, the fact that he just felt like he had to, or even Darren Horn actually told us that before the game, he was showing Sam some video from 2 years ago, the last time since NKU beat Cincinnati. And he reminded him that, hey, you had an ankle issue in that game that doctors told you should not be playing on. You were more injured the last time we played UC than you are now. And you can't tell. Look how well you played in that game when we beat them. Look how physical and aggressive you were. You just wonder if maybe a motivational talk like that got through to him, and it got him going for whatever reason of like, yeah, I can push past this. I can give you guys a little bit more, because he definitely had a different juice than he had the first 3 games for NKU in this one. But Trey Robinson stepped up for the second game too with them. I mean, he was kind of a little slow start to the season, played well in that second half against Nichols, and then stepped up again in this one. He had 12 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists. He did have 4 turnovers. He's got to clean that up. But seeing those 2 guys step up, I think, is important for this NKU team, because you're wondering, do you have the go-to scoring without Warwick? And those are the 2 guys you were looking to with all their experience. All right. Xavier had a big win over the weekend over Wake Forest, 75-60. They play Siena on Wednesday, and then they go to Fort Myers on Monday to play South Carolina in the first round of their exempt event. Takeaways from this Wake Forest game. I mean, Ryan Conwell hit 4 threes. He had 21 points, 4 assists, 3 steals, no turnovers in 36 minutes of play. And then the big three, we talked about this on our last show, and I said kind of the big takeaway for me with Xavier right now is that they're relying so much on that three of Conwell, Zach Freemantle, and Davion McKnight. You look at those three guys again in this one, they go 45 points, 11 assists, and 1 turnover. They didn't shoot all that efficiently, but Skinny, when you have 3 guys handling the ball as much as they are, shooting the ball as much as they are, and they only turn the ball over 1 time, you're going to win a lot of games.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to see the game because I was flying to LA, but a buddy of mine's a season ticket holder. He said he thought they moved the ball great in that game, and I trust his opinion of it. So that was a good win. I mean, that was a really good, solid win. I don't know where Wake was picked in the ACC, but I think I knew it was. I thought it was middle of the pack, but yeah. So that's a good win.
Yeah, and then they'd already beaten Michigan, so they're playing well. I think they still have some things to iron out after seeing them play Xavier. Xavier presented some issues that I'm not sure that they had been tested with yet, but they have a chance to figure it out. I'm a little worried about their point guard play, but the big thing here was Xavier's defense. We've talked a lot about how the Xavier team is just going to have to outscore people this season. I mean, they hold opponents to 60 points like they did this Wake team. They're going to win every single time. They also had 18 turnovers forced, which isn't something that they normally do in the pack line defense, but a couple of guys like Ryan Conwell and Dante Maddox, who came from different systems, they seem to be a little bit more aggressive about going and getting the ball, and I think that's paying some dividends for Xavier. Kentucky smacked Lipscomb around 97-68 on Tuesday night. The Wildcats have Jackson State on Friday, and then Western Kentucky on next Tuesday. I think the big story from this one was Jackson Robinson. You're coming out of the last game. We had talked about him only scoring 1 point. You're like, oh, that doesn't look great considering he was expected to be their leading scorer, even though they still beat Duke. But then he steps up in this game, 20 points, 7 boards, 6 of 10 from the field, 3 of 6 from beyond the arc. That was a really good sign to see Jackson Robinson play like that.
Yeah, but again, it shows you, I mean, they've got just so much firepower, and they got so many guys that can score and make shots. Again, I want to see the next test when that comes. Because I think they caught Duke at probably the right time, right? A young team early in the season, not much depth, dealing with some guys. And again, I'm not poo-pooing the win. It was a great win by Kentucky for sure. But I think they caught him at a good time. I think, that's going to end up being a really good Duke team when all is said and done. But let's see the next big test because, they've been all fun and games in these bye games, right? Where they're slinging up 90-plus points. And they scored 77 on Duke, don't get me wrong. But, yeah, I just think they've got so many weapons that on a night when Jackson Robinson scores 1 point, you go beat Duke. Okay, well, he's also capable of doing what he did last night and score 20 points. And when he does in a big game, how much of a difference is that going to make?
On the subject of that Duke game, I know we're going back a little bit here, but the idea of the young guys for Duke, young talented players, a Cooper Flagg, who's an extremely talented freshman, they're not a finished product right now. They're going to get better throughout the course of the season. If you face them in 2 months, they're going to be a completely different team. Kentucky as older guys, there's probably not as much upside there. I was talking with a coaching friend about this. We had an interesting conversation, and his question was, like, what would you rather be? If you look at Kentucky right now, yes, that older group is going to get a win, a non-conference win against this Duke team, and it's going to look great, but they may not have as much upside as the season continues on, whereas Duke is obviously going to be in a different spot 2 months from now. How do you view that? Do you think that's something to weigh when you're thinking about these teams? Do you think that really matters, or where are you at on it?
No, I think it's a fair point, but I would also say this group of veteran guys has only played a handful of months together. Why can't they have some upside? Why can't they get better together?
I think there's that point. And the other point that I brought up is you might be right. In 2 months, Duke might be the better team in February. At the end of the season, regular season, Duke might win that game. But here's the problem. Then you get into March and you play at a neutral site in some weird time zone or something, and your routine is off and the game is weird and you have a police escort to the game. And now all of a sudden, guess what matters again? Experienced guys who have been there and done it before. And freshmen tend to freeze up. Go ask John Calipari.
Yeah, right. Fair point.
So it's just an interesting thing to weigh now when we have all these changes in the sport, where I was talking to a friend who's a head coach at Division I level, and he's like, yeah, I don't know about Kentucky. I don't know if I'd want to be in Kentucky's situation with all those old guys. And I'm like, I don't know, coach. I still think that'll work at the end of the season too, when you get into the tournament. But I mean, how about Lamont Butler, to your point, with 16 points again. And then Kobe Brea had 12 points. Those two guys both go 3 for 3 from 3-point range in this game. The shooting of this Kentucky team is just off the charts fun to watch.
And that's where I go back to. The thing that is impressive is how they have gelled as quickly as they've gelled. I mean, it almost feels like none of them care who gets the open look as long as somebody gets the open look because they trust the guy who gets the open look to make the shot. That's a hell of a thing, to be honest with you, and to do it that quickly. And I get your coaching friend's point, but I still think the more that this group plays together, the better it's going to get. Now, again, I don't know if the ceiling's to the roof or not. I just don't. But I still think this team has a chance to get better. Maybe it has a chance to get better defensively that we don't really see right now because they've overwhelmed, bye game teams. But, they held a pretty good Duke offense to 72 points. That tells me something there. They've got guys who can defend, but also defending is getting to know how guys do, getting to trust rotations, all of those things, communication. And I think that only gets better as the season progresses.
Well, what were we talking about before the season? Our concern about Kentucky was, do they have that alpha on offense? Do they have that go-to scorer? And now you talk about how well they're moving the ball and sharing it, and it's like they don't care who the go-to guy is on a given night. You almost wonder if that's part of the roster construction at work here, right? Like they never got that alpha guy that had to be the one with the ball in his hands the whole time. And we're looking around saying, is that a bad thing? It might be a good thing, especially with the way Mark Pope's offense works. This is the MO. It's perfect ball movement, sharing the ball, finding cutters, finding shooters. They're doing it to perfection right now, at least against the competition they've faced. And I would say Duke is pretty strong competition. So I've been nothing but impressed with what I've seen from Kentucky to this point.
Yeah, me too.
All right, let's switch gears to college football. The third edition of the college football playoff rankings were released Tuesday night with undefeated Oregon holding at number 1. In fact, the entire top 5 remained unchanged. Ohio State, Texas, Penn State, and Indiana round out that top 5. Notre Dame took BYU's spot at number 6, but the Cougars are still in the bracket as the projected number 12 seed. Also, Georgia is back in the playoff field with the 11 seed after the impressive win over Tennessee. Skinny, what do you make of the latest CFP projections? Anything stand out to you?
No, I just think the fluid nature of this is going to be crazy. I'm really interested to see what transpires with Ohio State, Indiana on Saturday. And depending on how that decision comes down, let's just assume it's an Ohio State win. What do they do with Indiana at that point? I still think they're a very deserving one-loss team, but what do they do with Indiana? I think that's the next domino to fall. And then obviously now you are down to the Big 12. I always thought it was going to be a one-bid circumstance, and now it's clearly a one-bid circumstance, whoever wins the Big 12.
What happens to Ohio State if they lose to Indiana?
It's a great question. I don't think they fall all the way out. I don't, but you're going to have all these 2-loss SEC teams, and then at that point, to your point, if that does happen, a 2-loss Ohio State team. The 2-loss Ohio State team would have lost to the number 1 overall seed at the moment, and to an Indiana team that probably at that point
should be 2 or 3.
2 or 3, right? So I mean, do you dock them for? And let's just say it's a close Indiana win. I can't imagine Indiana, blowing Ohio State out in this game. If Indiana wins, I assume it's going to be a close win. I mean, do you really ding them for those 2 losses entirely?
Skinny, is this world prepared for an Indiana 2 seed?
Wow, that would be
3
something.
Seed?
That would be something.
I just can't even picture that. It feels, well, one thing that's for certain.
He wins. Google him.
Well, yeah, that's true. One of these SEC teams that are a 2-loss team is going to get screwed.
Yes.
There's no way to make it all make sense and make it equal. They're all beating each other. So the logic is going to run out on someone. It's like, okay, well, this team made up for their loss here with that win, and so that puts them in. But for some team, the logic you use to put the other teams in, you're not going to be able to use to keep them out. Like, it's not going to make sense. Someone is going to get completely screwed in all this.
Absolutely.
And you're just going to be like, there's no reason for them to be out and that team to be in other than they just got left out.
I mean, Texas A&M and Texas still have to play each other. I mean, what if A&M pulls off the upset there?
There's just so much parity in the SEC this year. And with this new playoff system going at the same time, it's just making for chaos here.
I mean, here's the thing. Do you ding Ole Miss for the loss to Kentucky, but then they turn around and beat Georgia, and then Georgia turns around and beats Tennessee? I mean, it's been insane.
That's what I'm saying. There's all of these losses where it's like teams interacted with each other and another team that they lost to. And so you can kind of like make sense of it to a point, but then eventually there's always another team that's like, but what about these guys? They beat so-and-so. They should be in there too. And you can't put 4 or 5 SEC teams in there. So,
and that's where, the SEC's talked about going to 9 conference games, and maybe that is the right thing to do, but that invites even more beating up of each other, in my opinion.
I don't know what the answer is yet, other than it feels like we just won a SEC and Big Ten tournament, or at least that's what they want.
Well, they've talked about it. I mean, they've talked about having like finishers play each other from the year before, and maybe that's what the case is. But as we know, like finishers from the year before don't mean that team that year is going to be like a number 1 Oregon playing a number 1, let's just say Texas wins the SEC. I don't know if those 2 teams are going to be the same the next year. They're not going to be. I mean, Michigan was the national champion last year. Look at them now.
The idea of this multi-week playoff coming up is just, I don't know if we're ready for it, Skinny. It's going to be
I think we're ready for it. I think it's going to be great.
I cannot wait. Ohio State beat Northwestern 31-7 last Saturday. Every time, and this is another nothing game. No one got hurt at Wrigley Field, which was good. There were a couple guys that went down, but it sounds like they're doing okay. They'll be back for this week, so that's good. Kentucky beat Murray State 48-6 to move to 4-6. They played Texas at 3:30 this week. Obviously, a big matchup with Texas, but at this point for Kentucky's season, I don't know that anything really matters.
No, I mean, they would have to upset Texas and then probably upset Louisville, or not probably, upset Louisville to get to a bowl. I mean, that's a big ask in the last 2 weeks.
Right. And then Cincinnati lost at Iowa State 34-17. They play at Kansas State at 8 p.m. It was 10-10 at halftime of this game, Skinny. And then they were outscored 24-7 the rest of the way. That had to be disheartening for Bearcat fans.
Agreed. I mean, I was watching that game on the plane, watching the first half of it, and the first drive, they looked great. They went right down the field doing what they wanted to do. And that happens sometimes, right? You got whatever your script is and you're able to do, and then teams adjust, and Iowa State certainly did. But after that was a very disappointing offensive performance. I mean, very disappointing.
Well, they just never got anything out of the passing game.
Right.
You end up running Sorsby 14 times for 141 yards and a touchdown, which just seems like a weird offensive strategy. And he only completed 10 of 18 for 66 yards in this game. Corey Kiner rushed 18 times for 120 yards. So clearly it was a ground and pound attack for the Bearcats. But the one thing that I look at and is just frustrating is 13 penalties.
It's insane.
For about 100 yards on this UC team. And that's where I wonder, if you're a UC fan, it's like things started off pretty well this year. You're trying to look for signs of Scott Satterfield getting this program on the right track, moving in the right direction. That's 13 penalties in a game like this is a bad sign.
Yeah, and you're not winning this week against Kansas State. And then it's going to come down to the TCU game, and I can just feel the nervous tension in Nippert Stadium for that game, right? Because, again, I think this team was capable of getting to a bowl, still can get to a bowl if it can beat either Kansas State or TCU. I just don't think they beat Kansas State. I think any logical UC fan would even agree with that take. But the nervous energy and nervous tension of that, of if you don't get that 6th win, did you really take a big step forward, or was it just a baby step forward because of maybe the way the schedule? The whole narrative of this is going to change if they don't beat TCU.
Yep, I agree. All right, let's go to our pick'em, where you were 4-4 last week. You're 46-34 overall now. I was 3-5. I dropped to 37-43. Best bets: my Ohio State and Penn State minus 22.5 parlay hit. Your Tennessee bet did not. So if you're not following along here, here's what you want to do. You want to follow Skinny on the local pick'em games. You want to follow me on the best bet, and then you're pretty good to go. Yeah, or fade us both on the opposite.
Yeah, correct. The Costanza method.
Bengals are on a bye this week. So we start Saturday at noon, Indiana at Ohio State. The Buckeyes are an 11.5 point favorite. The total is 52.5.
That's actually, I saw one place that's gone up to 13.5, but I'll go with the 11.5 number. I think Indiana plays is tough. I think they've got a better defense than you think they do, because it feels like it's all been about the offense and Curtis Rourke, the transfer quarterback, and what he's done. I think Indiana hangs around in this game. I'll go Ohio State 24, Indiana 20.
24-20. So IU gets the cover and it stays under the number at 44. God, in my gut, I just believe Ohio State is going to get this done. Indiana's going to have to prove it to me. I'm going to go Ohio State 35, Indiana 20, Ohio State in the over for me. Saturday at 3:30, we've got Kentucky at Texas. The Longhorns are a 20.5 point favorite. The total is 46.5.
You know, it's goofy. Kentucky plays well at Tennessee. They upset Ole Miss at Ole Miss. The Murray State game was a get-right game in many ways. They got a young quarterback a chance to play in the second half of that game, Cutter Boley, and he played pretty well. So I think and the defense certainly dominated as it should have. I think that's enough of a get-right game for them to hang around. Texas has the Texas A&M game the following week, which again has huge stakes for everything. I mean, SEC, college football playoff rankings, or for some of those guys staying in the mix. So I think you get Texas caught looking ahead a little bit here. I'll go Longhorns 27, Kentucky 17.
All right, so that is Kentucky and the under. I do like the under in this game. I'm not buying Kentucky. I think Texas needs to be locked in. They're playing for a lot more than Kentucky is right now. They need to put this game away. I'm going to go Texas 35, Kentucky 10. So Texas and the under. I'll also say the SEC has had me in a pretzel all year. Kentucky has absolutely owned me in terms of betting them. So I would certainly fade whatever I select with this Kentucky game. Saturday at 8 p.m., Cincinnati at Kansas State. Kansas State is an 8.5-point favorite. The total is 52.5.
Yeah, I think Kansas State opens this thing up. I think UC's kind of in woe is me mode at the moment, and they can't seem to get much rhythm going on offense, and that's been the puzzling part for me of late. I'll go Kansas State 34, UC 17.
I'm at 34-21. So you have the under, and I have the over. We both have Kansas State covering here. All right, and that brings us to our best bet of the week. Skinny, what do you got?
Going back to the Big Ten, the Big Ten's been pretty good to me this season. I'm going to take Minnesota getting 12 at home to Penn State.
All right, so Minnesota plus 12 at Penn State.
No, at home to Penn State. They're at home.
At home, okay. The funny thing about that is I almost took Penn State in that game, almost took the opposite side of it again, so we would have been opposite sides. Instead, I decided to go elsewhere. I'm going for a little SEC alternate spread parlay at just over plus odds. Drop Ole Miss down to -6.5 at Florida.
Okay.
And drop Missouri down to -2.5 at Mississippi State. Plus money parlay. There you go.
Like it.
All right. Ask anything time. Just got a couple questions for you. We'll start with rank these fictional sports movies based on how well you'd fare as a coach in them. Hoosiers, Major League, Space Jam, Rudy, and the Mighty Ducks. Well, here, let me go on I can put number one and the last one for you, right? You tell me if I'm right about this.
Yes.
Hoosiers is number one.
Not even an ounce of doubt. Yeah, not even an ounce of doubt.
It's so obvious that, it's a perfect fit. You literally should have played Gene Hackman in Hoosiers.
Yes, exactly.
Norman Dale, you would have been perfect for that role. And then the last would be Mighty Ducks because you're not a hockey coach.
No, that's a good point. I'll put Space Jam number 2. Major League 3, and then what was the other one?
Could you handle all the personalities on that roster for Space Jam?
Oh, I can handle. Trust me, I can handle personalities just fine.
So what was after Space Jam?
Major League, and then what was the other one in there? Oh, Rudy.
Man, I don't know. Rudy, I feel like would have been a good place for you. Oh, no, actually, that's untrue. Rudy might need to be last because you'd want to start Rudy the entire season. That's Absolutely. The problem with Rudy.
Dude, Rudy would have gotten in a game for me by that point. Yeah. I would have needed them to come in and beg me that last game. I'd have just Rudy getting the crap kicked out of him in practice. I'd have gotten Rudy some reps.
Rudy would have been your starting quarterback. You would have just, I love this kid. He has moxie.
Exactly.
He's my Gardner Minshew.
I mean, listen, hey, if a kid gets beat up like that, he needs to get in a game.
That's a great question.
It was a great question.
That's a great question. All right. You have to pick one Cincinnati staple food to eat every day for the rest of your life. What is it?
Man. I'll go Graders. I'm an ice cream guy. I don't do it every day, but if I'm forced to do it, like Skyline every day, there's just no way.
You can't do Skyline every day.
I hate to do this, people. You can hate me for this. I don't like Geta. I've tried. I just don't like Geta. I'm sorry that I don't. I just don't. Maybe
that is a you problem.
Maybe Grippo's potato chips, right? Because you can mix that with numerous sandwiches.
Yeah, that'd be a good one.
But I'm not a big potato. I'm a Ruffles guy, but I don't
eat chips every day.
Every day, right? Yeah.
Yeah, same. That's the problem is I wouldn't want to be eating chips every day. That'd be 100 pounds more than I am right now. Donato's pizza I think I could do Donato's pizza every day. More so than LaRosa's even. Because
Yeah,
of thin crust.
yeah. The only thing about LaRosa's I could do every day is because I like their hoagies, so I could mix and match like their sandwiches and I like calzones. So if it would have to be a pizza every day, probably not. But if I could mix and match LaRosa's, I could do that.
Yeah, that's the question. It says staple food. So that does mean we have to choose one menu item or just like the entire restaurant?
Yeah.
Because LaRosa's would be an easy choice. They've got other good stuff there.
Yes.
Otherwise.
Yeah. That's a good question, though. I like
Another good question. 2 for 2 today. We'll see if we can go 3 for 3. This one's not quite as good, but it's fine. What is Skinny's favorite TV game show of all time?
I'm partial to Jeopardy. I did like $100,000 Pyramid. I was a big fan of that. I do like Jeopardy. I like playing along with Jeopardy. I do.
Is $100,000 Pyramid the no whammies game?
No, that's what was that game?
Pressure Luck.
Pressure Luck. Yeah, that was Pressure Luck. No, $100,000 Pyramid was where you one person could not see the answers and the person had to give clues.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
All right.
I like the Pyramid. I want to close this with this, by the way, Rick. So yesterday I couldn't get across the Clay Wade Bailey Bridge I was driving to Beechwood. We were playing a scrimmage game last night, and I had plenty of time after I left the Bengals. But the Clay Wade Bailey Bridge was like I couldn't even make the light to turn left before I could get to the Clay Wade. I missed like 10 light cycles. So I'm pissed. I turn around, I'm like, I'm actually going to drive down and take the Anderson Ferry across. It's a nice night. I'm $5. It's well worth. I'm going to take I'm tired of the headache of this. So as I'm driving on, I guess where you would go to cut down to River Road, this dude goes whipping around me.
Here we go.
Does a U-ey. And when he does the U-ey, he plows into a car coming down the hill there from Elberon and then takes off. So good Samaritan me, I actually called the cops and tried to explain to him what happened. I hope they caught the guy. I at least had a description of the car, kind of a description of him a little bit. I don't think the person in the white car was hurt. It was not a glancing blow. I mean, it was a clear crunch. But
is everybody just on drugs all the time now?
Dude, I honestly, I'm like, what are we? Because when the first time I'm like, what an idiot. And then I can see him taking off. And I'm like, oh, no. We're not doing this, my man.
Yeah, Lindsay and I were up in Montgomery. We were going to Go Bananas a couple weeks ago on a date night, and out of nowhere, we're going through a part where they have all the little turnabouts up there.
Yep.
And someone just comes like right through the middle of a turnabout, ramps over the curb part of it, skips through like multiple dividers in the area there, and then goes through a sign and into a telephone pole.
Oh my Lord!
I hope they didn't have a medical emergency, but at this point, you just have to assume they were probably overdosing on heroin or something.
No, this guy clearly had he knew he didn't want to get caught by the cops for whatever reason. He probably had an open bench warrant on him, for goodness sakes.
Probably.
No, I'm serious. I mean, any person that has any ounce of humanity, you did a dumb thing with the U-turn to hit another car, and then the human nature of it would be crap. I want to make sure that person's okay. And yeah, I'm probably going to get in real trouble for this. But if I'm not drunk or high or have an open bench warrant against me, the trouble will be I've caused an accident. I'm going to have to pay the insurance, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And his wheels probably bent up underneath his car as he's driving away and stuff. He probably died out a mile down the road.
I don't know how it got resolved. I just hope they caught this dude because I gave a description of the car. I didn't get a license plate. I mean, it would be a damaged car. I had the color kind of close. It was a reddish, maroonish colored car, actually more SUV. When he made that U-turn, I'm like, what? And I literally, as I'm driving, because he whipped around me first. I'm like, what a dumb. And as soon as I don't think I got the second word out, he plowed into that other car.
The real lesson for all of our listeners out here is head on a swivel. Be careful what you're doing.
No question.
The neighborhood watch Skinny is out to get you, and we'll talk about you on this podcast.
I will. I hope they got you, guy.
Act right, people.
Act right, people. Thanks very much. Appreciate all the questions. Thanks for listening and watching. For Rick Brewing, I'm Richard Skinner. It's been the Skinny Podcast, the weekly potpourri edition, presented by Blake, the attorney Maislin, who hopefully will go after this guy and sue him.
Get him, Blake.